there was all these stories coming out that when you turned 60, you were going to have one last match. That was the plan. It was going to be a death match. There's all these kind of stories about it. It's come out that MJF was the guy you were thinking about doing it with.
Yeah.
Talk about what the plan was and why it didn't happen.
Well, yeah, I wanted to, I wanted some type of motivation to help me lose weight, because the only reason I'd ever gotten in shape was for a wrestling match. I didn't like it. I didn't think it was fun. I wasn't like Bagwell, who walked around with his shaker bottle, that wasn't part of my culture, I was so glad when I was Cactus Jack and just my arm showed. And so I had a convertible at the time, and that was my tanning bed. I just drove around with my top down. And then I would take, for a big match, I would take a niacin tablet 15 minutes before out. It would flush your skin. It was like, that was my idea of tanning. And so I wasn't into that whole culture, but I worked out, and I worked out harder than people thought, because I had to be in shape to try to go with people who were much better athletes than I was. And there was only like 5 distinct times where I was like, man, my lack of cardio really held me back, because for the most part, up until the back got bad, and in the entirety of my run in TNA, I just couldn't work out as hard as I wanted to because my back was so bad. But Avril said to me one day, she said, "That looks like your hip." I said, "How could it be my hip if it's my right lower back?" She explained medically how the piriformis muscle can grip onto the sciatic nerve, and it all made sense. And when I went to the orthopedic guy and I saw that x-ray, I realized that it could be fixed. And I said to the guy, I haven't been imagining this. He said, "Mr. Foley, I've been doing this for 25 years. This is the worst hip I've ever seen." He goes, "Honestly, I don't know how you're walking." And that was when I basically gave up the GM job. I thought it would be there waiting for me. I was told it would be waiting for me, but Vince is like a child with a shiny toy. And when I left, a shinier toy emerged, and that was Kurt Angle. Making his return to WWE after like 12 years, and Kurt became the new GM, and I was okay with that, because like I said, if it's something I loved, I would not have liked doing it. I mean, I would have bothered me to leave. But anyway, I need to tell you about the history of the hip and the pain, which got so much better so quickly that when I started thinking about doing that match, I realized that it wouldn't be the match, and I would have felt incomplete if I didn't do the one move I'd always wanted to do and never had the chance, which is drop an elbow off a TV truck. Onto the hood of a car, so that they get the low angle shot. It would look like I was landing in people's living rooms. But I had a serious talk with myself, and I realized if I do that move, there's no telling how much damage I might do, and I could go back to feeling that way for the rest of my life. Like, there's no documentation on somebody dropping an elbow off a TV truck onto a surgically replaced hip, and I was like, I'm not going to take that chance. And that was in combination with getting a minor concussion from doing basically nothing, showing a couple of trainees at Tom Pritchard's gym. I was trying to make the point there's no one right way to do anything, but try to put a little extra something in everything you do, put your own flair. And I said, for example, like when I took a turnbuckle, and I was showing that my arm would fly up in the air, and that the goal was, as I came down, I would clip my eyebrow on my bicep. And that's what I did for turnbuckles, is what I did for guardrails. Every once in a while, I'd miss the mark and I'd split my eyebrow open, and that was a price I was willing to pay, but I wasn't willing to pay with my health, and I wasn't willing to pay with with my hip, and I wasn't willing to play with my head. And I just thought sometimes discretion is the better part of valor. First person I called was MJF, because we'd had a top secret meeting at a Long Island steakhouse, and he laid out 6 weeks of beautiful television. Like,
I know you said that you don't want to give away his full story. Give us a tease, something that would have been in there in that storyline.
You know the promo Cane Dewey? He was literally going to Cane Dewey. He was going to beat up my son on television. And I was going to come back looking for vengeance. And I just thought, promo-wise, in the same way that CM Punk raised my game, and just to give you an idea about CM Punk, they had written Punk saying, oh, here comes, it looks like a float that's late for the Thanksgiving Day parade. Here comes Mick Foley. And Punk crumpled it up, threw it on the ground. He said, I'm not treating Mick Foley that way. And he made me feel like I could cut that promo. It's amazing how belief in someone helps them believe in themselves. And I remember Paul firing me up too, talking about how despicable they were and the idea that they were making fun of Jerry Lawler. And I didn't know where the inspiration came from, but they were making fun of him. I came out and I said, he was dead! Jerry Lawler was dead! And they brought him back to life. And I realized after the fact where that came from was the movie Almost Famous, where that little kid who has the crush on Penny Lane, which is Penny Lane. Did anyone watch Almost Famous? And he's telling her that she wasn't as valuable as she thought, and that he'd watched her be auctioned off for a case of beer. And she tries to disagree, and he says, I was there! I was there! And it's hard hitting. And then she goes, was it least imported? Like trying to save a little bit of dignity. If you haven't seen it, it's a beautiful thing. And you find inspiration. It wasn't that I stole the line. It was that touched me, and then hopefully it ended up touching other people. And then they started giving me more free reign to do things. But it was Punk saying, no, we're not going to do it that way. We're going to do it this way. If I could fast forward a few more years, when I had a chance to do, and I haven't talked about it much. I may have talked about it on my podcast a few years ago, but it was pretty heavy, and it was impactful because WWE wanted me essentially passing the torch by literally passing my barbed wire bat to Dean Ambrose, who we know as Jon Moxley. And I had Becky Lynch sitting with me before she got the push as the man, and she was, like at one time questioning whether she should even continue in wrestling. And I remember her calling me, and we'd talk things over, and I remember the advice I gave her was two things: be patient, be prepared. And she was patient. When the moment was upon her, she was prepared. But she was sitting with me as the writer came over, and I said, he goes, what do you think? I said, I don't think it should be as comical in tone. And I said, how about we do this here, we do this here, do this here, and then at the end, there's nothing more powerful than Moxley's expression. I don't need to say, have a nice day. I don't need to pander to the audience. That's good for another promo. But this is about seeing something in Moxley and literally passing the thing most sacred to me, the barbed wire bat, to him. And then I sat with Moxley for a little bit, and I said, he's going to say something about the cell because we were in Pittsburgh. And he said, I'm going to say, John, you shouldn't be doing this. You shouldn't. You're going to get beaten up by Brock Lesnar. And he goes, he said, why did you do that cell match? And I said, something along the lines of, because I'm Mick Foley and that's what I do. And he heard me out, and I wanted him to reply like, I'm Dean Ambrose, this is what I do. And he heard me out, and he goes, wait, I like that. I like that. I like that part about, that being who you are. He's quiet and understated, but really focused. And we did it. We did a rehearsal, and then they said, would you want to do another rehearsal? I said, I just got goosebumps on a rehearsal for a backstage segment. I think we're good to go. And we did one rehearsal, we did it, boom, and it was so freaking effective. Like it really felt like it was a change. And that wasn't be as big a change as he had when he switched companies, but it was pretty powerful, and it was evidence to me that I still had some gas left in the tank.